It is a Tuesday afternoon. The light in the bathroom is the light of a single bulb behind a frosted globe. You are brushing your teeth. You look up into the mirror. The person in the mirror is doing what you are doing. The person in the mirror is 1/10 of a second behind. The lag is not the kind of lag that exists. The lag is the kind of lag you cannot quite measure. You tell yourself, the lag is your eyes. You tell yourself, the lag is the speed of the light through the glass, the speed of the signal through the nerve, the time it takes for the brain to know that the hand is moving. You tell yourself this. You tell yourself, this is what is happening. You tell yourself, this is the reason the person in the mirror is 1/10 of a second behind. But the question does not leave. The question is the question you have been carrying for the past 3 years, ever since you watched a video at 2 in the morning of a man in a sweater explaining in a voice that was not unkind that the probability that you are real is 1 in billions. You have not thought about anything else in the small hours since. The toothbrush is in your hand. The person in the mirror is doing what you are doing. The lag is not the kind of lag that exists. In 2003, a philosopher at Oxford named Nick Bostrom published a paper that has not, in the 20 years since, stopped being cited. The paper was 14 pages. The paper had 1 footnote. The paper had a single argument. The argument, when you state it plainly, is this. 1 of 3 things is true. Either human-level civilizations go extinct before they develop the technology to run simulations of their own ancestors, or human-level civilizations that develop the technology choose not to run the simulations, or we are, in fact, almost certainly already inside one of the simulations. This is the trilemma. The trilemma is 23 years old. The trilemma has not been refuted. The trilemma has not been improved upon. The trilemma is, in the language of the philosophy department, considered a serious contribution to the field. The trilemma is, in the language of the rest of the world, the reason that the question will not leave you at 2 in the morning with the toothbrush in your hand. The argument has one requirement. The argument requires that at least one civilization somewhere in the universe develop the technology to run the simulation. The argument does not require that this be us. The argument only requires that this be, in the long history of the universe, statistically likely. The argument assumes, in its quiet way, that the universe is large enough to be full of simulators. The universe is large enough. The universe is large enough to be full of anything. The trilemma is 3 options, and the first option is the kindest. The first option is that civilizations do not survive. The first option is that every species that gets close to the technology decides on the way to do something else. The first option is that the technology never arrives, because the species is gone before the technology is. The first option is, in the language of the simulation hypothesis, the kindest one, because it means the question is moot, because there is no one to ask. The second option is the strangest. The second option is that the species arrives at the technology, and the species decides, in its collective wisdom, not to use it. The second option requires that every civilization that gets close to the technology make the same moral decision. The second option requires that this decision, made in private, in thousands of civilizations, across millions of years, in the long dark between the stars, be the same decision every time. The second option is, in the language of anyone who has ever watched a species not agree on what to have for lunch, the most unlikely of the three. The third option is the one you came here for. The third option is that we are inside a simulation. The third option is that someone, somewhere, with a technology we cannot imagine, is running a version of this. The third option is that the person in the mirror, the toothbrush, the Tuesday afternoon, the bathroom light, the lag you cannot measure, are all being rendered in a resolution we cannot perceive by an operator we cannot find. The third option is the one the argument says is most likely, by a factor of billions, if either of the first two is false. The third option is open. The light is the wrong kind of light. The first clue is at the bottom. The first clue is the smallest distance the universe will let you measure. The first clue is called the Planck length. The Planck length is 1.6 times 10 to the negative 35 meters. The Planck length is the smallest meaningful distance in the universe. Below the Planck length, the idea of distance stops working. Below the Planck length, the universe stops being smooth. Below the Planck length, the universe starts to look to the equations like a grid. This is not a metaphor. This is what the math says. This is what the math has said. For 100 years, every time the math is taken down to the smallest scale the equations will allow. The universe, at its smallest, is not continuous. The universe, at its smallest, is granular. The universe, at its smallest, is the kind of thing that a renderer would produce if the renderer was being asked to produce something that looked continuous to the people inside. The second clue is at the top. The second clue is the speed of light. The second clue is the fact that nothing in the universe can move faster than a particular number. And the number is not, on inspection, the kind of number that physics requires. The number is suspiciously round. The number is suspiciously low. The number is, in the language of the simulation hypothesis, a frame rate. The third clue is in the middle. The third clue is the fact that the constants of the universe, are tuned with a precision that does not occur in nature to allow matter to exist. The third clue is the fact that the universe, on inspection, is suspiciously rigged in the way that a video game is rigged to allow the player to play. The math at the bottom, at the top, and in the middle is wrong. The math is wrong in the way that math is wrong when the math has been chosen by someone to look like physics from the inside. The second clue is in the lab. The second clue is in an experiment that has been run in slightly different forms for 120 years. The experiment is the double-slit experiment. The experiment is the experiment that physicists, when pressed, will admit they do not understand. The experiment is this. You fire a single particle at a barrier with two slits in it. You watch where the particle lands. The particle, if you are not watching which slit it goes through, lands in a pattern that requires the particle to have gone through both slits at the same time in some kind of superposition. The particle, if you are watching which slit it goes through, lands in a pattern that requires the particle to have gone through only one. The act of watching changes the outcome. The act of watching, in some sense, chooses which outcome occurs. This is not a metaphor. This is what the experiment shows. This is what the experiment has shown every time, in every lab, in every country, for 120 years. The act of observation in the universe is not a passive act. The act of observation in the universe is a thing that the universe responds to. The act of observation in the universe is the kind of thing that would happen if the universe were, in fact, being rendered on demand, only at the resolution the observer is looking at. The act of observation is the API. The act of observation is the part of the system that the system, in fact, requires to be called, in order for the part of the system being observed to be computed. The act of observation is the renderer, being called from inside the render by the part of the render that is looking. The third clue is in the world. The third clue is in the way that the world sometimes is not the way you remember it. The third clue is in the way that thousands of people at the same time remember something that did not happen, and the thing that did not happen is the same thing in the same detail for all of them. The third clue is in the way the universe occasionally appears to have been re-rendered in a way that is consistent across a population, and the population is large. The Mandela Effect is the name for this. The name is for Nelson Mandela, who a great many people in 2010 were sure had died in prison in the 1980s. Nelson Mandela did not die in prison. Nelson Mandela was released from prison, became the president of South Africa, and died in 2013 in front of the cameras. The people who remembered him dying in prison were not lying. The people who remembered him dying in prison were remembering with the same kind of clarity that you remember your own childhood, a thing that did not happen. The Mandela Effect is not, in the language of the psychologists, evidence of anything. The Mandela Effect is, in the language of the psychologists, a pattern of false memories that propagate through social networks. The Mandela Effect is, in the language of anyone who has lost 2 hours to a list of these, unsettling. The Mandela Effect is, in the language of the simulation hypothesis, a render artifact. The Mandela Effect is, in the language of the simulation hypothesis, the moment the renderer rolled back, the moment the renderer fixed a bug, the moment the version number on the bottom of the screen changed and the people inside did not. If we are in a simulation, the operators are not, themselves, simulating nothing. The operators are running the simulation for a reason. The reason is, in the language of the philosophy, an open question. The reason is, in the language of the rest of us, the part of the trilemma that nobody likes to think about. The reason, in one version of the story, is research. The reason, in this version, is that the operators are scientists, and the operators are running the simulation to find out what a civilization does at the edge of its own capability, when the civilization is being watched. The reason, in this version, is that we are, ourselves, the experiment. The reason, in this version, is that the data is being collected. The reason, in another version, is entertainment. The reason, in this version, is that the operators are bored, and the simulation is the show. The reason, in this version, is that the operators are watching, and the operators have favorites, and the operators have settings they adjust, and the operators are not themselves gods. The reason in this version is that the simulation is the kind of show that a species that had the technology would, in fact, want to watch. The reason in the third version is the one nobody says out loud. The reason in this version is that the operators are not running the simulation at all. The reason in this version is that the simulation is running the operators. The reason in this version is that the question of who is on which side of the screen is the kind of question that does not have a stable answer in a system of sufficient depth. You are brushing your teeth. The person in the mirror is 1/10 of a second behind. The lag is the kind of lag that does not exist. The question is not whether the simulation is real. The question, by now, is moot. The question is what it would change in the way you live if the simulation were. The question is whether the simulation, if it is the case, is something you would be able to detect by any method that did not itself require the cooperation of the simulation. The question is whether the operators, if they exist, are the kind of operators that would, on finding you looking, show you the source code. The operators, in the language of the trilemma, are not obligated to. The operators, in the language of the trilemma, are running the simulation for a reason, and the reason is not, in the language of the trilemma, the operators wanting to be found. The reason is, in the language of the trilemma, the operators wanting the data, or the operators wanting the show, or the operators wanting whatever the operators want, in a system of sufficient complexity to be running this. You cannot prove the simulation from inside the simulation. The simulation, by definition, is a system that is not designed to be proved from inside by the people inside. The simulation, by definition, is a system that is designed to look from inside, exactly like a universe that is not a simulation. The proof, if there is one, is the kind of proof that requires the operators to show you. The proof is the kind of proof that the operators, if they exist, are not, by the structure of the trilemma, obligated to provide. You will, tomorrow, look in the mirror. You will brush your teeth. The person in the mirror will be 1/10 of a second behind. The lag will be the kind of lag that does not exist. You will, for a moment, wonder. The wondering is the point. The wondering is the part of the simulation that the simulation, if it is a simulation, has not figured out how to render in a way that does not feel to the people inside like a door opening onto a basement you did not know your house had. We will be back tomorrow. New question, new answer. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss what comes next.